Hello, the purpose of this screencast is to teach you how to write the first draft of your Minnesota interview script. This is meant to be collaborative, meaning one partner will create a document and the other partner will be shared on that and you will work together on the same document. Ideally, or in a perfect world, you would sit side by side and work on this. But it is possible to be in separate spaces and at different times work on this. Okay, let's get started. So it's good to review where we've been. Before you actually start writing the first draft of your script, you need to have watched the screencast for the question organizer and taken notes to prove that you watched that question organizer screencast. Then you will have completed the question organizer. This is a single document that you and your partner shared, and it looks a lot like this right here. This is the question organizer, and I did mine part of it for Dred Scott. By the end of it, you had 10 big questions. That's important. We'll come back to it. Okay, and I'm even going to open up that document because I'm going to come back to it, so I'm going to be constantly coming back to this question organizer, so you may want to have that open. That brings us to what we're doing today. Right now you are watching the screencast. You're going to answer 5 questions to show that you watched this screencast, and then included on this are my example that I'm going to complete for you during this screencast, as well as 2 examples from the past. So you can look at what students did a couple years ago or even a year ago, so you can get a sense of how the script should look. Please use those, they're very helpful. After you've watched the screencast and you've answered the 5 questions for the screencast notes, then you're ready to jump into this. Pay attention to due dates. They change, but they will be posted with the post. First thing you're going to do is review the questions from the interview question organizer. So have this open because you're going to be coming back and copy-pasting these big questions. Next, Partner 1 creates the Google Doc below, Minnesota Interview Script Organizer. We're going to call Partner 1 Biff, and Biff's going to create this Google Doc. And then Biff, Partner 1, is going to share this Google Doc with Partner 2, and Partner 2 is Maud. So Biff and Maud are partners. Eventually, Biff and Maud, partners 1 and 2, are going to work on their first draft to the script together. They don't need to be in the same space or even working at the same time. It's easier that way, but it is possible to work on it separately. I will show you how. So let's start up here with part 1. Review questions from the organizer. Boom, did it. I opened this up and I have this ready to go. Number 2, Partner 1 creates the Google Doc and shares it. Okay, so Biff has opened up the document. Up here it would say Biff McGee Interview Script Organizer, and Biff's going to go to share. Biff's going to put Maud's name in. Biff's going to make sure Maud can edit, and then you're going to send that. I would also highly recommend Biff to send a separate email with this Google Doc attached saying, hey, it's ready to go, let's start working on it. Okay. Once Biff's got this made, let's take just one more look. Shared it. Now the 2 want to start working on it. So let's take a peek at what this thing looks like. First of all, there's an introductory section. This is where you set up the scenario that you have created with your partner, and you also start giving us us being the audience, a little bit of information about your person that you're interviewing, your famous Minnesotan. Then you have 10 questions. And that should ring a bell because with 10 questions, you can see it goes all the way to 10 questions, you have 10 big questions here. So these 10 big questions, which lead you to answer these little questions, will all appear on your script. And it divides all the different categories you took notes on evenly. So you have 2 for early life and background, you have 2 for major accomplishments, you have another 2 for events that were going on in the world, another 2 for connections to Minnesota, and a final 2 for legacy. Some people don't do it exactly like that. They may add one more question for accomplishments because they need to and take away one from legacy. That's okay, as long as all the topics are touched on. All right, later on I'm going to show you how the introduction and the closing work. Okay, right now I'm going to show you how the actual script works, or how I would start writing this. So let's imagine Biff is the interviewer, and Biff's going to be interviewing Maude, who's playing Dred Scott. Well, Biff's going to jump to this and say, okay, I got 2 questions here. Mr. Scott, what was your life like before the court case? And Mr. Scott, what was your life like as an enslaved person? I'm going to use both of these for questions 1 and 2. But you're going to see that first I need to preface the question or set it up. But I'm going to ask this question. So I like to start out with the one, Mr. Scott, what was your life like before the court case? So I'm going to ask something like this in the question box. So, Mr. Scott, what was your family life like before your famous and impactful fight for freedom, which is this fight for freedom is the court case? But you don't want to just go right into asking a question. It doesn't sound like a conversation. You want to set a question up first. So before the interviewer asks that question, he or she might say, Mr. Scott, even though your time in Minnesota was brief, it is here that you found the means to fight for your freedom. It is also here that you met your wife. So, Mr. Scott, what was your family life like before your famous and impactful fight for freedom? This sounds more conversational. Also, I've included some facts. He met his wife in the Wisconsin Territory, which is where Minnesota was now, or is now. Also, it's in Minnesota that he started the court case. So I'm giving facts from my research in this preface. Then, Mr. Scott needs to acknowledge the question. So if Biff is working on the question part and asking it, Maude, who's playing Dred Scott, is going to respond to the question. But first, she needs to acknowledge it. So the mock Dred Scott would say, yes, it was in and around Minnesota, known as Wisconsin Territory, a fact from my research at the time, that I was inspired to fight for my freedom. It is also the place where I started a family. Then he's actually going to, or she, Maude, playing Dred Scott's actually going to go into answering this question. Whoops. There we go. And it's going to say, in 1837, a fact, I was married to Harriet Robinson, an enslaved African-American servant owned by soldier and Indian agent Lawrence Taliaferro. We had 2 children together, Eliza and Lizzie. We had 2 sons, but neither of them survived beyond infancy. Okay, so these are all facts. In 1837, he was married. The names of his children, Eliza and Lizzie. The fact that he had 2 sons die, but they didn't get beyond being babies. The fact that Miss Robinson was owned by Lawrence Taliaferro. These are all facts from my research. Notice also, he gives some bad news at the end of this response. Therefore, you need to acknowledge the response. The interviewer does. You don't want to go straight into a question after he gives you bad news. So, the interviewer might want to say something like this in response. I am sorry to hear about your 2 sons. Regardless, thank you for sharing personal information about your family. Then, the interviewer is going to go into setting up the next question. So, Mr. Scott, your early life was very different from mine. I did not encounter the challenges you faced as an enslaved person. Then, coming back to here, Mr. Scott, what was your life like as an enslaved person? I literally ask almost something exactly like that right here. Therefore, Mr. Scott, what was your life like as an enslaved person? Now, Mr. Scott is going to acknowledge the question. Yes, I did not have the privileges of enjoying the basic freedoms of other Americans enjoyed. I was denied liberty, opportunity, rights, equality, and a voice. However, I am glad you asked me this, for I will now have a chance to share with a wide audience the challenges many African Americans faced as a result of slavery. So Dred Scott's acknowledging the interviewer's question before he actually goes into answering it. Then here, Dred Scott's going to answer it. I was born in 1799 in Virginia. That's directly from research. And it's answering, I want to show this. I'm answering some of these little questions. When was he born? Where was he born? Who was his master? I got around already to answering questions about children. I may get into answering about education. I might start talking about the jobs of an enslaved person. Let's see. So, I was born in 1799 in Virginia. During my childhood and early life, I worked as a field hand on the Blow family farm. All facts. It was very difficult work. The hours were long and working 6-hour days for 10 to 12 hours a day. That's directly from my research on slavery. Moreover, we were working without basic freedoms and pay to plant and harvest cash crops for the Blow family. So cash crops, that's from my research. Here's more research. In 1832, I was sold to Dr. John Emerson, a surgeon for the U.S. Army. My life changed at this point, for I primarily worked as his personal servant. As a servant, I still did very challenging work for many hours a day without basic freedoms and pay, but my duties were more domestic, meaning around the home. He wasn't a field hand anymore. If I wanted, I could list some of those duties here of what he did at that time. So you're going to see we have a conversation between these two people. Also, Biff, who's playing the interviewer, can do his side, just the questions. And Maud can, on a shared document, can start responding because she is going to play Dred Scott. So it's possible to work on this if you're not in the same space and even not at the same time. Now let's talk a little bit about the introduction. I'm going to show you the Wanda gag example. So this one, you're going to see that, introduce yourself. Hello, I am Priscilla Universe, and I am here today on February 18th, 1947, interviewing Wanda Gag for an article I am writing. You're going to see that this is a little fantasy-based because Wanda Gag actually died in 1946, but they're going back to her house and maybe talking to a ghost. I can't exactly remember. Then they're going to introduce the life and accomplishments. So Priscilla's going to say, Wanda Gag is a famous book writer, artist that wrote and illustrated millions of cats that won the Newbery Honor in 1929. Tell the interviewer when and where the interview is taking place. We are in the actual home of Wanda Gag that we asked to fly her back from New Jersey. So apparently she lived in New Jersey and that's where she died, but they flew her back to Minnesota where she was born, to her home. Tell the listener why you are conducting the interview, and you're there to ask her a few questions about her childhood, major accomplishments, and life after that. And then you're going to see that when they do, questions 1 and 2 are about early life. They start to get into major accomplishments with questions 3 and 4. Okay, and maybe questions 5 and 6, they start doing events, big events at the time, or connection to Minnesota. And then 7 and 8, they maybe get into, connection to Minnesota, or you might see information about major events. You can determine the order that's best with your partner. Then questions 9 and 10, maybe getting into legacy of the person, how they impacted the world or Minnesota history. Then they get into their closing, and I think in this particular closing, the interviewer, Priscilla, steps out of character and tells about how Wanda really died. So giving the facts behind it. So they wrap up their scenario and go into that. So here's where you and your partner can actually start getting really creative, taking that scenario that you finished, taking those questions that you have, and actually putting them into a creative script. And taking as much research as possible and packing it in there. That means all these little questions here I can answer. Either I can answer those by having the interviewer acknowledge it or set up the question by including facts, or I can include those facts in how the person responds. So you can get really clever with how you include as many facts as possible. Okay, if you have any questions, email your teacher. Thank you for listening.